Right, let's start with question one. Question one asks about the phrase "that is" in the sentence. To the casual observer, the Kamwa Chung building, which is located in the Eastern Oregon community of John Day, that is simply a small, unassuming structure made of rock and wood, and asks about that is. Again, so we need a verb here. We don't want an additional subject because that creates a run-on sentence. So that is does not work because that has that additional subject. Is just a verb, so that works, right? The building is an unassuming structure. It adds an extra subject. We don't want that, and deleting it does not work because it has no verb. So the answer is B. The next sentence says, given that all of these are true, which of these most effectively introduces the historical and cultural significance of the building? So let's look at the sentence. To those with an interest in history, however, it's a unique building that preserves a part of the legacy of the Chinese community in the 19th century American West. So that has the Chinese community, that's culture, and the American West in the 19th century, that's history. Great, that one works, but let's look at the rest. The next one says has 7 rooms, front room, herb shop, etc. So that's some history and some culture, but not really. It's more of a description. So let's not go with that one for now. All right, is cooperatively preserved and operated by the Oregon Parks and Rec Department in the city of John Day. That does have history, but it doesn't really have any culture. The last one says has a kitchen that holds antique tables, a large wood stove, and a variety of Chinese teas and cooking utensils. That doesn't really have any history, even though it has some culture. The answer is F. Let's go with question 3. Built in the 1860s, the Kamwa Chung building first served as a trading post for travelers who would track to the land east of the Cascade Mountains by news of gold strikes there. And it asks about the tense of the word attract. So attract here is in present tense, but we're talking about built in the 1860s. The building served as first. So we want something that's in the past tense. So this doesn't work because it's present. Will be attracted is in the future tense. We definitely don't want that. Were attracted is in the past tense. That one works, but let's look at the last one. Last one says are attracted. That's also a present tense. So we want to go with option C. Were attracted to the land. Question 4 says, in 1887, the original owner sold the building, and then says, the writer is considering adding the statement, which is correct, to 2 enterprising young Chinese immigrants, Ing Doc He and Lung An, and says, should the writer make the addition here? Looking at the sentence after, it says, the men combined their skills, organized a group of investors, etc. So we are talking about those 2 guys after this. So yeah, it probably makes sense to add their names, but let's look at the 2 options. So yes, because it builds upon a plan made about the guys in the preceding sentence. So we don't mention the future owners in the first sentence. So we probably don't want that one here. The next one says yes, because it provides a logical link to the information that follows in the essay, which is correct, right? We mentioned the entrepreneurs here, and then we move on to talk about them. Great. Let's go with option G. Question 5 asks again about a tense, saying the men combined their skills, organized a group of investors, and remains in business together for more than 50 years. Again, we're talking about the past tense. They combined their skills and organized investors. So remains in the present tense is not correct. Has remained suggests that they are still in business, which is not the case. Once again, not correct. Have remained has a mismatch with the past and present, definitely isn't correct. But remained is in past tense and works fine. Let's look at question 6 now. Educated in the Chinese classics and fluent in English, Lung An was a skilled merchant who built a successful textile and import business. He also sold food supplies to local miners. His partner, Doc He, established an herbal medicine clinic. He became famous throughout Central and Eastern Oregon when he would make perceptive diagnoses and curing patients whose previous treatments had failed. Question 6 asks about the statement, when he would make. So again, in general, we want to try and stay as concise as possible. So he became famous when he would make works, but it's kind of long. So let's look at the rest. He became famous for making perceptive diagnoses. That works. As he made doesn't quite make sense because he became famous for making these things, not as in the process of. And made isn't correct either because he became famous because of his actions, not in addition to them. So that works. And curing patients whose previous treatments had failed. Again, with this one, we want to try and stick to the simplest one. So curing patients whose previous treatments had failed, that works. Who experienced that their previous treatments had failed is also correct, but it's pretty lengthy. Being previous treatments, which doesn't quite make sense because the patients are not also the treatments. And of whom previous treatments also doesn't work because patients of whom previous treatments had failed does not refer to the patients correctly. 7, therefore, is A. Seven, therefore, is A. The next question asks, the writer is considering deleting the preceding sentence. Should the sentence be kept or deleted? Saying, with the sentence being the one that describes Hay's actions and how he became famous. And this should probably be kept because if we look up in the passage right before that, they actually mention Lung An's achievements, so it makes sense to mention Doc Hayes as well. But let's look at the options. So kept because it provides information that suggests why Hayes' work was particularly noteworthy. That's valid. And then kept because it presents examples of Hayes' most challenging and successful diagnoses, which isn't correct. It only describes them. Let's go with F. 9 says, if the writer were to delete the preceding sentence, the paragraph would primarily lose a statement that, so let's look at the sentence, over time, the partners' building evolved into a social, medical, and supply center, as well as a post office, library, and herb shop. So this kind of describes all the things it became. So let's look at which of these descriptions mentions that. So it demonstrates the scope of services eventually provided by the Kamwa Chung and Co. building. That works, but let's get the rest. Makes clear that the social aspect was the most important to visitors. Not really, it just describes all the things. A summary of a regular visitor's experience, not quite. And indicates for how long, once again, there's no mention of length. So we're going to go with A. 10 asks about the sentence, Hay and On's business prospered through the turn of the century during the Great Depression and beginning the 1940s. So once again, this is in the past, and we want to preserve the sentence structure. So we have during and through. So we probably want another preposition. As it entered is not a preposition. Beginning, which is option F, is not a preposition. Becoming is not, but into is. Into the 1940s, so that works. Next, let's move to question 8. Question 8 says the writer is considering deleting the previous sentence and asks if it should be kept or deleted. And it's at point 8 right here. So if we look right before it, it's describing the achievements of Doc Hay. And the sentence prior to that one is describing the achievements of Lung An. And it's asking if we should remove the sentence that starts right here. And it probably doesn't make sense to remove it, because if we're describing Lung An's achievements, we should probably describe Doc Hay's as well for completeness. So let's look at the options. The writer is considering deleting it, etc. Option F says kept because it provides information that suggests why Hay's work was particularly noteworthy. That definitely works, but let's look at option G. G says kept because it presents examples of Hay's most challenging and successful diagnoses, which is not the case, right? It doesn't give any examples at all. So let's go with F. Question 9 says, if the writer were to delete the preceding sentence, starting at point 9, going back, the paragraph would primarily lose a statement that blank. So let's read the sentence. Over time, the partners' building evolved into a social, medical, and supply center, as well as a post office, library, and herb shop. So option A is demonstrates the scope of services eventually provided by the Kamwa Chung and Co. building. That's correct, but let's look at the rest. Makes clear that the social aspect of the building was the most important to visitors, which it doesn't. It just describes all the places. Provides a summary of one regular visitor's experience there, which isn't correct. It just describes all the places there. And lastly, indicates for how long it prospered, which it gives no measure of. So let's go with A. Question 10 asks about the word beginning in the sentence, Hay and On's businesses prospered through the turn of the century during the Great Depression and beginning the 1940s. And if we look at the pattern of the sentence, we have through, which is a preposition, and during, which is a preposition. So we want to repeat it with the preposition right here. Beginning is not really one. As it entered is not. It's like a verb phrase. Becoming does not work as well. But J, into the 1940s works great. Let's look at question 11 now. The building was restored by the state of Oregon in the 1970s and has become the Kamwa Chung and Co. Museum. So the building was restored, so we want something again in the past tense. So has became is interesting because it's kind of in the present, but not quite. It has some tense mismatch, so we don't want that one. Have become, again, has similar mismatches. Became, that one would work, right? It was restored by the state and became a museum. Let's look at the last one. And become. Become is not correct because it's in present tense. So let's go with C. Question 12 asks, designated as being called a National Historic Landmark in 2005, it encapsulates an error. So let's see. We want to see if we can cut this down into something more concise. In general, you should try to be concise. So as being called is kind of lengthy, but let's look at the rest. With the appropriation of, once again, it's grammatically correct, isn't great. Designated in being identified as does not work. Designated, you're not designated into something, so let's definitely veto that one. And designated a National Historical Landmark in 2005 works and is the most concise option. In general, if you have a bunch of options and they're all grammatically correct, the most concise one is often the best writing style. Let's look at this 13th question. So designated a National Historic Landmark in 2005, blank, it encapsulates an error. So besides doesn't really make sense because it's changing the subject. In conclusion and in time don't really add anything, right? It's designated a landmark and it encapsulates an error. These are both correct. Deleting it would work though because it performs an independent and independent clause. So let's go with that one. Question 14 asks, for the sake of logic and coherence, sentence 2 should be placed blank. So sentence 2 says, because the climate in Eastern Oregon is semi-arid, the artifacts left inside, and then lists the artifacts were preserved. So this is our sentence 2, and it asks in this paragraph where should it be placed. So let's look at our options. Right, so again, this is talking about the objects inside the house and how they were preserved. So where it is now, right, the sentence before it is saying that the business prospered for a long time. And the sentence following it says, although On died in 1940, Hay continued to run the building. So we're not yet talking about the objects inside it and their preservation. So this is probably too soon. Before sentence 1 is even worse. We haven't even started talking about how long the business lasted. Forget about how the objects remain. So we shouldn't do that one. After sentence 3 says, although On died in 1940, Hay continued to run Kamwachung until 1948, and the following sentence would be, after Hay's death, his nephew inherited the building and donated it to the city of John Day. Again, we're not really there, so let's look at sentence 5 and see if that one's any better. So sentence 5 says, for almost 20 years, it being the building, remained locked because in the sentence following it would be, the building was restored by the state of Oregon in the 70s. So this actually works great because it says the building remained locked, but because the climate in Eastern Oregon is semi-arid, the artifacts left inside were preserved. So let's go with J. The last question asks about the whole passage and says, suppose the writer's goal had been to write a brief essay that outlined the steps the state of Oregon took to restore the building. Would this essay accomplish this goal? So in general, this wasn't really about the steps the state of Oregon took, right? It was like an overall description of the building. So let's go with the no answers and see. So no, because it instead focuses on describing the history of the building and its uses. So that's correct, right? That's pretty much what the whole essay was about. Or no, because it focuses on critiquing O's business philosophies and Hay's medical diagnoses. And it doesn't really touch them, right? In fact, it might even celebrate them. So let's go with C. Let's go over some of the important strategies that we use to answer questions throughout this passage. First of all, when looking at a question, be sure to be very specific about the exact words asked in the question and the words that you're looking for in your answers. Oftentimes, these subtleties will lead to the right answer. Furthermore, in general, it's really important to pick the most concise answer possible. Oftentimes, being concise and avoiding big, complicated phrases is good writing style. Thank you.